Now on BBC One, John Cuthill with this week's Inside Out.
Delivering yachts like these across the world's oceans can be a great way to earn a living. But sometimes the reality can be far from a glamorous lifestyle of fair winds and foreign ports.
5 sailors dead in 3 separate tragedies. Tonight on Inside Out, did this man put profit before safety?
You owe it to the families who lost their husbands, their brothers.
The dangerous work on board delivery yachts is unregulated, so it's all too easy for a badly equipped or unregistered boat to cross the planet's oceans like a ghost ship.
How many more people, how many more skippers have to die? How many more families have to go through the heartbreak?
Family and survivors claim Reliance Yacht Management pressured skippers to sail into dangerous conditions against their better judgment and with fatal consequences.
It breaks your heart when you think of a loved one, somebody that you love so much, dying in fear.
Now the shipping forecast issued by the Met Office at 05:05 on Saturday, the 27th of December.
It's not always possible to avoid bad weather, particularly if the yacht delivery company you work for isn't giving you enough support.
We're getting ready to go out to sea. It's not a delivery and we're not crossing any oceans, but still, this yacht is better equipped than some of those delivered by Reliance. The crew are well qualified, the skipper's decision on board is final, and we've got the latest weather report.
It was midwinter when Alistair Crawford set out into the Bay of Biscay, bound for the Caribbean.
There are warnings of gales in Viking, north of Sierra.
He was a recently qualified skipper, but had already crossed a couple of oceans working for Hampshire-based Reliance.
Biscay Fitzroy, severe gale 9, occasionally storm 10.
These pictures were shot just hours later.
If you can tell the whole story.
Okay. We left Le Sable.
Richard Heath was on board.
The weather was okay.
The notorious Bay of Biscay was soon living up to its reputation. It's a dangerous place, as these many wrecks testify.
As we went out to sea, the weather deteriorated and got worse. The wind started to blow harder and the waves become bigger. It started off, it was blowing about 20-25 knots. And it went to 30 knots, and then 35, 40, 45, and that's when we decided to turn back. It kept increasing, 50, 55, 60 knots. We were about a mile offshore from Le Sable when a big wave hit the boat on the side.
The third crew member was 17-year-old Mick Dieperink from Holland. He described the events in an email.
Suddenly, a massive wave reached the top of our mast, so it had to be 50 foot high. The wind speed was up to 90 knots.
Rolled the boat through 360 degrees and knocked off the mast.
All 3 were thrown into the sea. Only Mick made it back on board.
It was being blown away from us and we couldn't catch up with it.
Richard's life jacket was torn away. Alistair called out to Mick, who was waving a red flare from the deck.
I had somebody calling me, not shouting, but very relaxed. It was Alistair. He said, Mick, port side. Here I am. And then I saw him. He was very calm and very, very professional. I know you can do it. Take command. Get some help. Then another wave came, and I lost him.
The skipper started to get very cold. He couldn't talk properly. His words were slurred. I couldn't understand what he was saying. Then he lost consciousness, and I had to swim, dragging him behind me.
I didn't pick Alistair up from the water, and everybody is telling me that I couldn't, but I don't believe them.
Richard and Alistair were pummeled by the waves and struggled to stay together. Although the life raft had inflated, it was out of reach of the 2 men. Richard saw a light and realised that the surf was breaking more often and the water was getting shallow. After struggling for nearly 2 hours, the 2 men finally reached some rocks. By now, Richard was exhausted from towing Alistair.
I tried to help him, but where he's in the water, I couldn't resuscitate him. I tried to drag the skipper up the beach, but I wasn't strong enough.
It's not your fault.
Mick stayed with the boat until he was rescued by the French emergency services. He also wondered whether he could have helped Alistair more.
I'm still very angry with myself. I will never know if I could make it and save him. I'm depressed and I found it hard not to cry. I feel so guilty.
After searching for help along the deserted coastline, Richard collapsed in an abandoned building.
I went back to the beach, but he wasn't there.
He wasn't there?
No.
He wasn't there?
No, so I don't know whether the tide came in and because I couldn't drag him out of the water over the rocks.
Alistair's body was washed up nearby. Mick never recovered from the trauma. He died a few years later. The yacht does not appear to have been correctly registered, a legal requirement for any boat in international waters. We understand another delivery company with boats in that area warned its crew to stay in port.
Alistair's mother claims there was so much pressure that he changed his plans for Christmas to get out to France. She says it was a case of pressure, pressure, pressure.
Go to the harbour, okay?
An inquiry found Alistair was trying to reduce delays to the delivery, but as the skipper was ultimately responsible. Richard Heath says the tragedy could have been prevented if basic equipment had been on board.
If we had some storm sails, we probably would have been able to sail much better in those conditions, and we probably would not have needed to have turned back. If we'd had a way of receiving weather forecasts, then potentially we would have turned back much sooner when the weather was still fairly reasonable. And if we had had better charts, perhaps we would have selected a port that would have been easier to get into.
Alistair Crawford wasn't qualified to sail a boat like this offshore. It's a commercial vessel run as a business, and as such has to be properly equipped with a well-qualified crew. A yacht being delivered for profit, often against the clock and in atrocious weather, is considered to be a pleasure craft. It's an unregulated industry.
Yachtswoman Dee Kafari knows only too well the dangers of her profession and that shortcuts put lives at risk.
By registering it as a pleasure vessel, he could do the trip across, and then once it gets to the Caribbean, it was going to become a charter yacht and then meet the requirements. And that just stinks of a way of not putting the safety equipment required for an ocean passage.
Reliance insists the boat was properly equipped and complied with all the local regulations. It says there was adequate weather information and a way of receiving it, and firmly denies that Alistair was under pressure. One of Reliance's most experienced skippers was John Anstess. He'd been senior coxswain on a lifeboat and had salt water running through his veins. His sister crewed for him.
To go through the bad weather that we went through out there, incredibly calm, knew what he was doing. I had every faith in him, and in fact I said to him, "Why aren't you panicking?" And he said, "Well, I can panic if you like." But you know, it won't help, but incredibly calm. It was a natural instinct for him, the sea. He could read it.
Later that year, Reliance contracted the Plymouth-born sailor to take a 44-foot catamaran from Cape Town to Seattle on the northwest coast of America. Delivering other people's yachts is a great way to see the world and experience the high seas. The crew are often unpaid as they're trying to build their mileage. Canadian Paul Webb wanted to get some more offshore experience.
Reliance came up mainly because it was fairly well advertised on the internet, and they had a reputation that I thought was fairly good at the time.
Paul flew to Trinidad, where he met John and Casper Venter on board Catshot. As they voyaged north, the weather deteriorated.
We were very close, I guess, to the Colombian coast, and we were starting to get some change in weather, and there was lots of thunderstorms and lightning and heavy rain showers and 3 to 4 meter waves, and the boat was getting battered up pretty good. The best thing we could do would turn around and head back to Aruba and wait for a change of weather.
Reliance criticised John for returning to port. John, Paul and Casper motored through the Panama Canal, but all three were worried about the unpredictable weather in the final voyage to Seattle.
John warned Reliance about the storms. He wanted to wait until the weather cleared and suggested an alternative route. But Reliance said he had a tired attitude and was making too much of the weather. Don't worry about it, they said.
His two options were a sensible route which was safer for both boat and crew, or to stop for those bad winter months and actually winter the boat somewhere safe, and he was in San Francisco.
He did ask Reliance if he could change route and go up around Hawaii and avoid the hurricane, and he was flatly told, no, the owner will go ballistic. You're taking too long, you're dragging your heels.
Paul felt safety was compromised, and he and Casper decided to leave Cat Shop when they reached California.
I told John that I wasn't happy going further north at this time of the year.
John told Reliance that Paul said their chances of survival were slim, a view echoed by local sailors. John now needed 2 new crew to complete the delivery.
He was told he had attitude because he was complaining, and don't tell prospective crew that the weather could be bad. Tell them that there's nothing wrong with the weather.
John was joined by Richard Beckman on the left, who recommended Dave Rodman. Dave's wife Carol knew her husband